Are you listening?
Welcome to the Nerf Report. My name is Brian Chappelle. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And what a week it has been. The Epic Games versus Apple feud escalated to Apple threatening to remove all Epic properties from the iOS App Store by August 28th. Nintendo held an Indie World Showcase in which they announced 23 new indie games coming to the Nintendo Switch. Activision announced the next Call of Duty game called Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and Baldur's Gate 3 received an early access release date of September 30th for PC and Google Stadia. And in channel news, we've officially hit 2,425 subscribers, which is insane. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed, and if it's your first time here and you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and help us grow this into something much bigger than it currently is. But despite all of that, for this week's episode, I want to talk to you about superheroes. Quite possibly the backbone of video games. Ever since the first superhero video game, Superman, launched for the Atari in 1979, superheroes have always managed to capture the imagination of gamers no matter where they play. And 41 years later, superhero video games look better than ever. PlayStation's Marvel's Spider-Man swung into action in 2018 and quickly became the best-selling PlayStation game in America, with over 13 million copies sold. Marvel Avengers by Crystal Dynamics finally brings the blockbuster franchise to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One for their first ever standalone title. And Marvel's Iron Man VR launched in July of this year, allowing gamers to finally experience what it is like to climb into Iron Man's suit. And you'll notice that for the most part, the games mentioned were all Marvel properties, as in recent years, DC video games have been few and far between, with the last mainstream DC comic video game being LEGO DC Supervillains in 2018. And before that, it was Batman: The Enemy Within from the now defunct Telltale Games, which launched in 2017. And the disparity between Marvel and DC video games doesn't just stop there, as since Superman launched in 1979, including mobile games, DC has launched over 86 video games inspired by DC Comics, whereas Marvel has launched 162 games. That's nearly 2 times the amount of video games. And even more interesting, when talking about video games, both companies definitely have their go-to leading man, as Marvel has produced over 42 Spider-Man video games since 1982, whereas DC has produced 35 Batman video games since 1986. And both Spider-Man and Batman sit at the top of the NPD Group's list of best-selling superhero video games, with the 2018 Marvel Spider-Man being in first place and the 2011 Batman Arkham City being in second. And I definitely think it should be pointed out that not all superhero games are good. Like, there was a period during the late 2000s, early 2010s, when Marvel was releasing superhero video games just to capitalize on box office buzz. And it resulted in some terrible video games, like Iron Man, Iron Man 2, and Thor: God of Thunder. Which raises the age-old question. What is better, a bad video game or no video games at all? Like in the case of Marvel, sure, they are firing out awesome games left and right, but it definitely took them a while to get their footing. But in the case of DC, following the massive success of Injustice 2 in 2017, it's pretty much been radio silence. That was up until now, as it seems that DC has completely changed course in terms of gaming, as this weekend, DC not only announced 1, but 2 video games during their digital DC Fandom event, with the first game being Gotham Knights, which represents a major break from the traditional Batman Arkham video games, as it includes things like the death of Bruce Wayne, online multiplayer mechanics, along with the ability to play as Batgirl, Robin, Nightwing, or Red Hood. And the second game that DC introduced this weekend is the Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, whereas instead of playing as vigilantes turned heroes, you will play as villains turned villains. I mean, I guess they're technically heroes? Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is also an online multiplayer, and it marks the latest game from developer Rocksteady. The game will allow you to team up with friends and play as Captain Boomerang, Harley Quinn, Deadshot and King Shark, who are sent out on a mission to kill specific targets who just happen to be members of the Justice League. Now, both of these games represent massive steps forward for DC Comics when it comes to video games, as both games will not only be running on next-gen hardware like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, but more importantly, they represent the evolution of superhero video games. Both Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad represent living and constantly evolving online worlds that developers are making. No longer do superhero fans have to pick up a comic and imagine what that would be like. They can now pick up a controller and live it. And much like Crystal Dynamics' Marvel Avengers, Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad will be games as a service that will continue to expand and evolve as time goes on, meaning that both games will have story expansions, new missions, quests, and activities to complete with friends. And to me, that is what makes this experience so much cooler. The idea of a cooperative experience with friends inside of the DC universe gets me extremely excited. One day you could be fighting Mr. Freeze as Batgirl and Robin, and the next day you and your friends could be trying to kill Superman as Harley Quinn and Captain Boomerang. And I totally understand. For some gamers, this departure from a rich single-player experience into an always connected, always online world can be a tough pill to swallow. Especially since I still primarily travel for work, meaning that I have to rely on hotel internet for gaming online, which in the case for games like Gotham Knights or Suicide Squad is going to be extremely challenging, and in some cases, probably not even possible. But despite all of that, it doesn't change my opinion that these new experiences are going to be extremely worth it. In the case of Gotham Knights, that game launches in 2021, and the footage that we saw of the game in alpha looked awesome. And it's going to be extremely fun to play either by yourself or with your friends. And in the case of Rocksteady's Suicide Squad game, we didn't really see any gameplay footage, so we still have to wait for that. But the idea of fighting the good guys as the bad guys who are trying to be good guys sounds extremely refreshing. And this is where, like, the journalist part of me diverges from the casual gamer side of me, because where I fall on this is, if I were to go back in time and tell 10-year-old Bryant that one day in the future, you would not only be able to lose yourself in a video game where you played as an Avenger, Batman, or even a member of the Suicide Squad, he would have freaked. And I think that that is something that we forget sometimes. We forget that love and amazement that we all once had for video games. And instead, we get upset about a lack of single-player offline support, a botched launch, or a disappointing story. Announcements of games like the Suicide Squad or Gotham Knights are the perfect opportunity to pause and realize how far we have come. How a 1979 Atari video game could start like this and eventually come to this. No. Well, that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Nerf Report. Thank you so much for watching. Until next week, stay safe, everyone. Hey, thanks again for checking out our channel. Are you like the thousands of people in the comment section down below wondering why does this channel have so little subscribers? Well, you can fix that today by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, commenting, and sharing it with your friends, which I know sounds like a lot, but I feel like our channel is worth it.